Greetings and welcome to the Department of Tangents podcast, a conversation with singer-songwriter Lucette, plus new music from Alaska. I'm your host, Nick Zano. This episode was originally planned to be a minicast, but when Lucette and I started diving into her songwriting and her new album, Deluxe Hotel Room, the conversation went a bit longer than I'd thought, which is fantastic because it means you get to hear more from Lucette about how this album reflects more of her true self as a songwriter, her approach to the arrangements and lyrics, the idea that this is an Americana album lyrically and more of a synth-pop album musically, and how she worked with producer Sturgill Simpson. As she explains in the conversation, her debut album, Black is the Color, was much more guitar-driven than Deluxe Hotel Room. It was a fine album and established her as a singer-songwriter to watch, but she also wrote and recorded that when she was very young, and it didn't necessarily reflect the musical influences she cherished growing up. You can hear that in the Isolation and Disillusionment on the title track. Simpson, who was an early fan of Lucette's, just let her be herself in the studio for this one. Stick around after the conversation for this week's featured track, Tough Love from Alaska. And now, here's Lucette. Are you traveling with a full band?
Kind of. It's kind of like a half band right now, because basically I had a full band, but they had to pull out of the tour for visa reasons in Canada. So I had to kind of scramble and get a band to fill in like 2 weeks right before the tour started. So right now it's just me on keys, a drummer and a bass player, but when we get to Nashville, there's going to be another keys player and then a saxophone player joining us for parts of it.
Right, because these songs on the new album kind of demand a different setup. The first time I saw you, it was just you solo opening up for Alejandro Escovedo in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Oh, cool.
And that the first album, you could do that more easily than this album.
Yeah, I mean, I think this album almost lends itself a little bit more to, I mean, I think definitely it's all the synth pads and everything, they have a little bit more, like, effects and stuff, but this album is a lot more sparse than the first one. Mm-hmm. So it's almost easier to kind of pull off with a stripped down. But I'm so sorry, I just slept through my alarms.
Oh, it's quite all right. Well, I saw P-Funk last night, and I'm still a little groggy from that, so we'll be well matched. Well, but some of the songs, they're sparse, but they also have different instrumentation. Like Crazy Bird and Talk to Myself, you have that throbbing synth underlying everything, and the music is sort of a mood ring for it. Does that translate back? Well, does it translate back into basically you and a piano? That's probably where it started to begin with, right?
Exactly. And I think with the first record, I kind of it's so guitar heavy, and I kind of mentioned to Sturgill when I was making it, I was like, I want to do a lot more with keys and synths because that's what I play. I don't play guitar, I play piano. Mm-hmm. So I kind of just I mentioned that I wanted synths to be like a way heavier influence on this album. Mm-hmm.
Is this closer to who you are as a writer and a singer, this album, than the first album?
I mean, I think so. I think, I was 19 years old when I started the first record. Right. So I think just this album is a lot closer to who I am just because I've grown up so much too, and had a lot more life experience to kind of draw from as far as writing goes. And I mean, I think the songs here are a lot more personal too.
Mm-hmm. Well, you did post on Facebook about the origin of some of these songs, and you said in that post that you don't usually do that sort of thing, so I don't know how much you want to get into it. But you talked about the title
Yeah.
track and Out of the Rain, and these come from fairly bleak times for you personally.
Yeah, I think, I think I was in a relationship that was really terrible for me, and I think I was young, and it was my first serious relationship. So I feel like I didn't really know that I was being treated so poorly, and if I kind of realized it, it was kind of a battle because I didn't know what I deserved, and I think from that relationship stemmed a lot of situational mental health issues, and I think it's something I've always dealt with, especially like self-image and you know just kind of grappling with the idea of like being my perfect self or whatever, and I think it's always something that's been like a tricky thing for me. But yeah, that's where a lot of these songs come from, and I think just even pursuing a music career amidst all of the other issues in my life, it's sometimes pretty difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think, pursuing something in the arts or something in music, or if, like something where you're constantly projecting yourself out to the world, it's like you have to kind of be on display, and sometimes that's not easy. And I think this is the first time, that I've actually like written about these things and written about kind of that vulnerability.
Well, that Deluxe Hotel Room kind of came exactly from what you describe in the song. You were sitting in a hotel room that somebody else had paid for, wondering, what the hell am I doing here?
Exactly, and I think what was so nice about actually opening up, and especially like writing that Facebook post, and was how many people messaged me and got back to me and said, "Oh my God, I've been in the same situation," or like, "I deal with so many of the same things," and that wasn't the point of it for me, but I think for me the point of it was so people understood where these songs came from. That's all I wanted to do, is just explain to people, like, this is a personal album. This one's different than the last one. That's all I wanted to say, but it was so nice for me to hear such refreshing things about, people opening up about their own issues and opening up about, like, pursuing the arts or, dealing with mental health issues. I think it was really refreshing and kind of cathartic and very eye-opening as far as like what a lot of my peers and a lot of other people go through. Because not a lot of people talk about it.
Yeah, well, they talk about it and it's hidden somewhere in the lyrics. It seems a lot of people, you have to kind of triangulate things a lot more. And this is, there are some very tough lyrics here. I can make them all want to know me if I do just as they say. And in Deluxe Hotel Room and Out of the Rain is when you're lonely as I am, you make up excuses to suffer.
Yeah.
I was going to say, is it tough to keep singing these songs on tour, especially, you're back in a hotel room on tour?
I think the fact that like I think that's why another reason why I wrote that big post too is because I wanted it to be not necessarily reliving a negative thing, but kind of like almost a therapy session on stage. Like, like it's not necessarily like reliving something. And I mean, there's always going to be times on tour that, you feel these feelings and stuff. I think any musician, at my level or more successful or less successful, I think, all of us kind of feel these things once in a while on tour because your friends are at home, your family's at home, your dog's at home, your girlfriend, your husband, your wife,
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, it's like I genuinely love what I do, and I think going into this album, realizing that these songs were more personal, I think it's nice because I feel like people are getting to know me a little bit more when I sing them live, and especially because I think my live show, it's not a party, it's not a dancey time. It's it's like it's a lot of, it's kind of like, here's getting to know Lucette hour, and it's way more of a listening set than a party set. And I think the fact that the songs are more personal, it's easier to kind of go there for me when I'm singing them, and it's also, I hope it's easier for the audience member to kind of get to know me as well.
Well, isolation is a big theme through there. So it occurs to me the feedback that you got on Facebook and perhaps the feedback that you get live or after shows on these songs might be comforting in some way.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I'm in a very different place from when I wrote some of these songs too. Like, I think I deal with a lot of stuff that I talk about on the record, but I think I've learned to handle things kind of in a lot better ways than I did before, and I think that's a big part of me growing as a person.
Mm-hmm. So when you're writing a lot of heavy songs, do you ever feel like you need to write something lighter? Just, I got to get myself out of this for a little while, because you have a couple of songs that are somewhat lighter, like Full Moon Town and Angel on the album.
Honestly, I never really write with a purpose. Kind of just, like, I wrote Angel for a boyfriend that I'm not with anymore, but it's always just, especially, like, I mean, Angel, I wrote that by myself, but I think, like, Full Moon Town, I think it, sometimes, I like to co-write quite a bit, but it's always with friends. Like, it's never like a clinical, like, Nashville setup thing. It's like me and a couple buddies, or like one other person, and drinking wine, or like, having fun, and like sometimes a song comes out. So I never really write with a purpose, and for me, it's always just like what I usually listen to is pretty soulful, pretty intense music. So I feel like that's just kind of what comes out sometimes. And yeah, I wouldn't say that like I get tired of that stuff. Like, the intensity doesn't freak me out.
Well, what do you listen to? What are those songs? Are there things you listen to sort of prep yourself for writing or for inspiration?
I'm kind of all over the map, really. Like, I love a lot of Texas country, like, Blaze Foley and Townsend Dance, but then, like, I love pop music. I love Rihanna. I love ABBA. I love, Elton John. And then, it really is all over the map. Like, I wouldn't, I think for me, it's just like, I love really kind of moody production, and I love great lyrics.
Mm-hmm. Well, that goes to the change in sound a little bit from the first album to this album. I was wondering, I know that you have said that when you got together with Sturgill Simpson to sort of figure out how you were going to approach this album, you purposely wanted to go in a different direction. But I wondered, was it more that these songs demanded a different sound, or did you consciously want to go in a different direction to change the way you were going on the first album?
Oh no, I definitely wanted, like, it was a conscious decision. Like, I think Crazy Bird is a really good example, because that's like a mountain country song. Like, if you can imagine the next time you listen to it, just the guitar player, like acoustic guitar, and the singer. It's a traditional country song, but I think both Sturgill and I kind of knew what I wanted going into it, and I wanted to kind of embrace not just like the Americana artist in me, but the pop artist in me, and the soul artist and the R&B artist in me, and and I wanted to kind of mush all of those things together in this album. So it definitely was a conscious decision to kind of take even the most traditional songs on the record and somehow like make them have that synth influence or the pop influence or the R&B influence or the soul influence.
It's interesting thinking about it now because you mentioned it for Crazy Bird. Lyrically, it's still very an Americana album, but sonically, it's a pop album.
Yeah, like a lot of it is definitely Americana leaning. Like even Out of the Rain, like a lot of that you could say, like a lot of people would say that's a country song, But I think I think a good song is a good song, and like a lot of country, could be pop as well. Like you look at I Will Always Love You by Dolly Parton, and then the version by Whitney Houston. Like you would never have said the Whitney Houston version was a country song, like it's if you had never heard Dolly Parton's version, you would never be like, oh, Whitney Houston's singing a country song. It's like, I think a lot of music lends itself to, whatever way you want to produce it. I think sometimes a good song is just a good song.
Well, that's where that Nashville sound thing comes from, with the strings and the more sort of pop-oriented country sound that popped up. You've known Sturgill for a while, at least as far back as your first album. How did he come to produce this album?
Well, I mean, I was kind of talking about what I wanted to do with the record, and he was like, I think we should do the record. It was pretty simple, but I mean, it took me a long time to get to this place too, and a lot of the songs, I had other songs that were definitely more country, more Americana leaning too, and it took me a while to kind of really hone in on what I wanted to do and who I was as an artist, and that's why it took so much time between the first record. Like, I probably could have gone back into the studio 3 years ago, but I don't think I was ready and mature enough to kind of carry my own. So I think, talking to Sturgill about it, there was a decision that he was going to make the record, and there was about a year of, sending songs and, sending each other music that was going to inspire the record, and sending each other, synth pads and all this stuff, and kind of getting all the instrumentation ready before going into the studio, and talking about drum machines and stuff. So, like, I think that we were kind of, sloppily in pre-production for a year, but it was more just like that conversation, and also he's a busy dude, a touring artist, so so it was a matter of finding the right time to do it. And, but it wasn't by any means like it was kind of like, okay, let's do this record, and then we talked about it for a year, and then we went into the studio.
What did he bring to the music?
A lot. I mentioned having horns on the record, but he was like, oh, I have the best guy, and the saxophone was completely his idea, and to me it just like completely elevates the music and totally takes it to another level, and that was him. And like just his education of different synths and different microphones, and like, I mean, that's a producer's role, but bringing in a drum machine instead of doing that on the computer, like we did like all the drum machine beats live. Like Miles literally played a drum machine with his fingers, and it's not like it's still kind of in the Americana sense of the word, like a live off the floor album, but with modern instruments. And I think that was something that was super cool. Like, even though we're using synths and we're using drum machines, it's not like a computer generated record. All the instruments were played live.
Well, Jim Keltner said a while back that a drum machine can still swing if you've got the right guy programming it.
Totally.
Now, a lot of this does focus on your voice more. It says it seems like your voice is somewhat drier, whereas the instruments in the background are a little bit more wet with reverb, which puts you up front a lot more. Was that a conscious decision? I know that in the press release it said that Sturgill had told you just sing it like you mean it.
Exactly. I think every artist, every singer has been in the studio where they're having to do 20 vocal takes on one song. And the first record wasn't necessarily like that, but there were moments that were. I think it's really aggravating to like have to push yourself to do that, and it almost feels unnatural. Whereas like, I think Sturgill's point was just like, we really need to capture the emotion behind these songs. Like, if you mess up, we could do another take, or maybe that little mistake will be perfect for the song. So I think it was just like, focus on like singing it with your kind of heart, and like singing it like you mean it, and it'll come out. And I think it did. Like, we did the whole album in 5 days, so it was a pretty like speedy process, but it was also a pretty serious work environment. Like, there was kind of no messing around, and I think both of us, like, if something wasn't working, we just figured something else out, and I think it worked out really well.
Is there any point on this tour where you step out from behind the piano and just sing with the band backing you?
Yep. There's like a nice little break in the set where I play piano by myself.
Well, no, I mean where you're not behind the piano, where you're just singing and not playing anything.
Just singing. Sorry.
Because that's a different experience for a singer.
Yes, and I love it. That's what I do at home now. Like, with my band at home, I just sing, and then I might go behind the piano for a few songs, especially because I kind of realized something when I was playing piano the whole set, that often it was just me and the drummer that were sitting on stage, and the energy kind of is brought down. Whereas like, when I stand, like, I feel like I'm way more in control of what I'm doing, and it's really nice, and I think it's really freeing and liberating.
It's strange how seemingly small a change can bring something like that forward, can change the whole context of what you're doing.
Totally.
So I have a couple more questions. I know that you've got to get going. I wanted to ask where the name Lucette came from.
It's my grandma's name.
And why did you choose to take that as your performing name?
I just decided because I always kind of felt like I wanted to be in a band, so I kind of wanted to be like in more of a group than just a solo artist, which it hasn't quite happened yet. But but like, I don't know, it's always so fun to create with other people, and it's kind of like an enigma sort of thing. Like, it's almost separating the creative stuff from my personal life in some ways, and it's kind of nice to have, like, not like an alter ego, but it's nice kind of separating it and making it like one thing. And I don't know, I was also like 20 years old when I made that decision, so I probably wouldn't care if people just knew me as Lauren Gillis either.
Would you? Well, have you, now that you've established that, have you sort of backed yourself in a corner where you can't release stuff as under your own name?
I'm fine. I like the Lucette thing still, so I don't necessarily feel that way, but who knows? Maybe when I'm older or something, I'll want to release something under Lauren Gillis. But I genuinely do like the Lucette name, and I kind of like the fact that it is separate from who I am and separate from my name, but still kind of in my family, because it is such a rare name too.
Mm-hmm. And where do you want to go from here? Is there a sound or an idea that you want to get to in your music?
I mean, I'm still kind of riding this one out, but I definitely, I think it'll be fun to kind of experience or experiment more with synths and experiment more with kind of pop sounds and soul sounds, and kind of just, I'd say, go off on a really big tangent with this record.
Mm-hmm. You said you had a bunch of other songs already written that you could have recorded for this album. Are those up for the next album?
You never know. I think it'll probably be 2 years before I go into the studio, or at least a year. So I think I have some time to kind of sit with any new songs that I have and kind of steep on those a little bit. But right now my focus is mainly just touring this one and really kind of bringing people a great live show.
Mm-hmm. And then that 2 years will give you time to make contact with Brian Eno for the next album for the synths.
Totally.
Well, thank you for calling and doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
An arrow to the head isn't always a trick.
Thanks again to Lucette for the conversation. To hear more about her and keep up with her tour dates and new releases, go to her website at lucettemusic.net and search for her on Facebook under Lucette Music and on Twitter and Instagram under Lucette Sings. And if you enjoyed this or any other episode of the Department of Tangents podcast, please consider subscribing and or giving us a positive rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Radio Public, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also listen on Spotify and YouTube or directly from the blog at www.departmentoftangents.com, where you'll also find reviews, essays, videos, and more. This week's featured track is Tough Love from Alaska from their debut album The Dots, which came out in May. The first thing I loved about this track was the opening groove, laid back but with a subtle drive to it. And then the contradiction carries over into the lyrics in the opening. Who gives a shit about anything lately, so glad to meet you. Then the chorus comes on heavy before it drops back into the groove, and that lovely skittering guitar solo around 120. Hard to beat a smart, catchy song with a sense of humor. Reminds me a bit of Letters to Cleo, if not in sound, in musical disposition. Check out the trippy video by animator Callum Scott Dyson too, which I'll post on the blog. Find out more about Alaska at alaskalaskamusic.com and find them on Twitter under Alaska Band. And now here's Tough Love from Alaska.
To meet you. Neil Young.